Lakuta Sichos Chelek Chaf, Breishis Beis, Lili Nishmis, Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Nasha Kaltman. We are also learning L'schos our dear friend Yosef Shleima ben Risha for a refuah Shleima Ukreva. Today we are going back into Chelek Chaf, and we're going to be exploring what is the role of man in creation. The context will be a Rashi, where Rashi tells us how the Eibishter compares or equates the human and the animals. Let us begin. Nachdem wie der Teire erzählt wegen der Bria von Chayes Haaretz und Brias Adam wie Ishtei b'yom hashishi l'maaseh Breishis, after the Teire relates to us the creation of the animals and the creation of Adam and his wife Chava on the sixth day of creation, koilil dem dibur von Eibishten zu Adam v'Chava, including the command to Adam and Chava, vayivarech, he blessed them, peru urevu, be fruitful and multiply, uredu bidgas hayam, and rule over the fish of the sea and over the rest of the animal kingdom. Stein in Teret zwei psukim. After all this, there are two psukim, b'shayches the Michael from the Adam and the Chayes, that talks about the food, the sustenance of the humans and the animals. V'chulu. Pasuk says, "Vayomer Elikim." Hashem said, "Hinei nosati lachem es kol esev zerei hazera." I'm giving to you all the grass and the things that grow in the ground. Lachem yiyeh la'achla. It is for you to eat. Then the next pasuk, "Ulachal chayas haaretz v'chal eif hashamayim," to the animals and to the birds. As kol yerek esev la'achla, I am giving you the green grass or greens and grass to eat. Is Rashi meitig befirushe dem Siyum von ersten Pasuk zusammen mit der Aschala von zweiten. Rashi quotes in the Dibur HaMaschil the last three words of the first Pasuk and the first three words of the next Pasuk. Lachem yiyeh la'achla u'lachal chayes aretz. It is for you to eat and for all of the animals as well. Unis mefarish, and Rashi says as follows: Hishvu lahem behemis v'chayes l'maychel. Hashem equates the people to the animals with regards to food. That meaning to say that they're eating the same thing. Hashem did not allow Adam and his wife to kill a creature and to eat its meat. But the grass, the green grass, or the grass greens, they can all eat it together. Pashtus Landman. On the surface, one can learn the fact that David is comparing the people to the animals with regards to food is Balalam. It is coming to teach us as Adam the Ishtis and given that Adam and his wife were prohibited from eating meat. Vidr Gourarie is Mefarish, as the Gourarie, the Pirush of the Maharal, explains, just like the animals don't eat anything other than grass, so too the human eats grass or greens and nothing else. So the Rebbe is going to give us now a series of questions based on this understanding. If the meaning of this pasuk, if the comparison that the Torah is giving us is for the purpose of prohibiting the eating of meat, then this will raise a number of questions in the Rashi and in the various different words of Rashi. It's difficult to explain that the entirety of Rashi and the comparison of the humans and the animals is to prohibit the eating of meat. For the following reasons. Aleph. Wie kann man von Hirschfell und Behemes v'chayes herausdringen, as der Adam turnet essen kein Wasser? How can you, from the comparison to the animals, derive that a human cannot eat meat? Be'ez mezet b'mochish, as kama v'kama von chayes, seine chayes terfes, was essen Wasser beheme v'chulu. When you see very clearly that there are many animals that are predatory animals and they eat meat. If you're comparing the human to the animals eat meat. So how can you derive from that the human can't eat meat? Und es ist ein Gadol zu sagen, als Rasha halt wie die Schitte, als Köde machet seine nicht gewinnt kein Chayes Terfes ba'olam. And it's very difficult to say that Rashi follows the approach such as the Ramban, who holds that before the sin of Eitz Hadas, before the sin of the tree of knowledge, there were no such thing as predatory animals. Nor der noch durch ein Chet is nishtana geworden sehr tava, and only after the Chet, the nature changed and animals became carnivorous. Because if that's Rashi's approach, that until Chet Tzadas, the animals were not predatory and did not eat meat. That's a major chiddush that Rashi has to say somewhere, or at least allude to it somewhere. If Rashi doesn't say it, we cannot. There's no way for us to accept that is Rashi's opinion. So we have our question. How can you learn from the animals to not eat meat if the animals themselves eat meat? That the aim learned in Pshat in Hishva. That the aim Rabbi Leo Mizrahi, who is another Pirush on Rashi, he learns what does it mean. There's a comparison between the humans and the animals. Just like an animal is not allowed to eat a human, so too a human is not allowed to kill an animal to eat its meat. But it's difficult to say that this is Rashi's intent. Because if that's the case, Rashi's missing the main point. Rashi should have mentioned the prohibition upon the animals to eat human flesh. Rashi doesn't touch upon that at all. So it's difficult to say that that's the pshat in Rashi. So that's our first question. If Rashi's point by bringing up the comparison between the humans and the animals is to prohibit meat, how does that give us a prohibition if the animals themselves do eat meat? And on the other hand, we have a different question. Why do we even need this comparison to learn that Adam and his wife were prohibited from eating meat? This can be derived directly from the understanding of the pasuk. The pasuk I'm giving to you the grass, which will be for you to eat. The Eibishter made it permissible to eat grass or greens. Rashi says in the end of his pirush, which we will yet learn. Like the greens that I permitted to Adam Harishon to eat. The say says Yerek Esav is itarti. So from this pasuk I understand that the greens were made permissible by the Eibishter, but anything else is not made permissible. So the pasuk itself already implies that the only thing the Adam is allowed to eat is the greens. So why do you need another comparison to the behemoths and chayis to tell me that you're not allowed to eat basar? It's understood from the pasuk. So that's our second question. Question one, how can you learn from the animals to not eat meat if the animals themselves eat meat? Number two, why do I even need a comparison to the animals if we have a clear understanding from the pasuk that you weren't allowed to eat anything other than greens? Gimel b'chal eifen v'ikar. Either way, here's our main question. In Yonish, al Pirush Rashi alated is the fattest traditional mikra. Rashi's role is to explain that which is the basic understanding of the pasuk. Vas is dashver in pshuti shel mikra. What is the question? What is bothering Rashi in pshuti shel mikra, in the basic understanding of the pasuk? Vas Rashi kum verempferen mit sein pirush hishvol lehem behemis v'chayis l'maychol. That Rashi has to answer and say that Hashem compared the humans to the animals. So that's our third question. What's bothering Rashi? What's missing in the pasuk that Rashi has to come to explain? In Sis Beis, the Rabbi is going to ask another three questions in the wording of Rashi. There are also some nuances that have to be explored in the words of Rashi. Why does Rashi use an unusual expression, and he did not permit a signin shel sipur, more storytelling-like way of saying that Hashem did not permit them to eat? Why does Rashi not write it in a more a common style? Avol basar aser. However, meat was prohibited, or something similar to that. If the chiddush of Rashi is that Hashem compared them to the animals, and that they're not allowed to eat meat, so Rashi should have said, "Hishvol lahem." What's the lashon over here? Hishvol lahem behemis v'chayis l'maychol. and basar aser. Loy hirsha seems like Rashi is telling us something more than just the fact that basar is not allowed. Beis, Rashi is meisiv medayik. Rashi actually adds words that specify as the iser al adam ve'ishta is lahamis beri v'lachel basar, that the prohibition upon Adam and his wife were to kill the creature and eat its meat. Unit bekitzer ubistama v'lehir shel adam lishtei lechel basar. Didn't write it briefly and simply. He did not allow Adam and his wife to eat meat. He didn't allow them to kill the creature and eat the meat. Which would imply that if the animal died on its own, not being killed by Adam or his wife, then it would be permissible to eat its meat. The only prohibition was to kill the animal to eat it. Where in Pseudos Mikra do you see any proof that this is the case, that the prohibition was only to kill the animal to eat it? Gimel. To the vast of Rashi Iber Chazer and Uba Arichis Ach Kol Yerek Esav Yoichlu Yachat Kulam. Why does Rashi have to sort of repeat this idea and in such a elaborate manner that if it's grass, if it's greens, they can all eat it together? In other words, Rashi already told us that they were not allowed to eat meat. Especially since the pasuk tells us that the greens are to be eaten, whether to the humans, whether to the animals. Why does Rashi have to repeat, but the grass could be eaten? And with the words yoichlu yachad kulam, they can all eat it together. What's Rashi adding with that extra phrase and with the long-windedness of it? Okay, so far we have 6 questions. Number 1, how are we learning from the animals to not eat meat if the animals themselves eat meat? Why do we need a comparison to the animals if the pasuk is very clear that we can only eat greens? What is bothering Rashi? Why does Rashi use the words v'loy hirsha, the style of v'loy hirsha, and not basar aser? Why does Rashi add the words lahamis beria that seems to imply that only to kill the animal is a problem to eat its meat? And number 3, why does Rashi end off with ach kol yerek esav yoichlu yachat kulam? Why the need to repeat all of that? In Siv Gimel, we're going to finish the Rashi, and we're going to ask 2 more questions on the last part of Rashi. Rashi continues. When it came the time of Noach, the children of Noach, Eibishter permitted them to eat meat. That any a creature that is alive, the Goimar, the Apostle there says, Lacham yiyil achla, you can eat it. Rashi doesn't say those words, but he says, V'goimar ki yerek esev, just like the greens, sheitarti la'adam rishon, that I permitted Adam rishon to eat. Nasati lachem eskoil, now I've given you everything else. You could eat the animals, you could eat meat as well. So that's how Rashi ends. That initially Hashem compared the humans to the animals, and he did not allow them to kill an animal, a creature, and to eat its meat. And then later, when it came the time of Bnei Noach, the children of Noach, Hashem allowed them to eat the meat, like the pasuk says, Now, the time for Rashi the reason that Rashi immediately in our parsha has to clarify that Bnei Noach were permitted to eat meat is moving that's understood. It's been discussed numerous times. As a gam Rashi verämpft nicht mit Pirusha Yashverigkeit, was wird nicht eder werden beim Lernen Asperity die can pasuk and Teresh Bixhav. Although Rashi generally does not answer a question that will only arise later on in a later pasuk. And certainly something that will be brought later on in Torah Shebal Peh, in the oral Torah, in Gemara, or in Medrash, etc., that might contradict the Pirush that he has here. Rashi has no need at this point to address it until later on when that question arises itself. Additionally, since Rashi and Chumash is following Pshutei Shel Mikra, is nitokin hechrech adas muzayin behesem mitatzkanas ha'inyan la'alacha. There's no necessity that it must be consistent with the halachic conclusion. So therefore, sometimes there may be a stira, a contradiction between Rashi's pirush and the halacha. Rashi has no need to address that. As long as Rashi has sufficiently explained what this pasuk means, Rashi has done his job. So although seemingly there should be no need for Rashi to be discussing the fact that later on meat became permissible. However, if Rashi is explaining this pasuk to a ben chamesh lemikra, muzer sich rechnen mit der Metzias, wie sie wird gesehen durch den chamesh lemikra. Rashi does take into consideration the reality as seen through the eyes of the child. Therefore, Rashi has to immediately clarify, as in the späte dikederes of the matik when achilas basar, that in later generations the eating of meat became permissible. For their pirush as lehirsha v'chulu, because the pirush of Rashi that Hashem did not allow Adam and Chava to eat meat is bistired to their metzias, but the mecham is that is in contradiction, is contrary to the reality that the child sees as meshechta beim v'chulu as the basar, that animals are slaughtered and meat is eaten. So the child is learning this Rashi that Hashem did not allow Adam Arishan to eat meat. So then he's going to say, 1 second, all around me people are eating meat. So therefore Rashi has to clarify immediately that in later generations the eating of meat became permissible. So the fact that Rashi addresses this right away in this Rashi, that is understood, because Rashi is answering the question of the child who sees in front of him people eating meat. As is aber nicht moving, but there still are 2 points that remain not understood in this last part of Rashi. To clarify this detail that meat became permissible later on is genug zu sagen blaze dem din. It would suffice to say the din that when the children of Noach arrived, Hashem allowed them to eat meat, as we'll see later on, or something similar to that. The mind of community to wissen dem genoyim mocker from the didn't pasuk. Why is it relevant for Rashi to quote the pasuk? Why did Rashi have to quote the pasuk? Why is it so important to know which pasuk it is? As long as you tell the child that there's going to come a time when meat is going to become permissible, it'll make sense why people eat meat. Base. And if for whatever reason Rashi feels it is necessary to bring this pasuk, it would have sufficed to bring the beginning of the pasuk. Any creature that is alive, it is permissible for you to eat it. Was the fun is klar, which would make it clear, as the Eibishter had matik when essen basar, that the Eibishter made it permissible to eat meat. For was is Rashi Aleph mash mit dem Iker die Werte lachem yeh lachla it is a blaze menames but have a gimmer. Number one, why does Rashi omit what seemingly is the most important words of that pasuk? Lachem yeh lachla, it's permissible for you to eat it, and only alludes to it with a gimmer. Beis meidach is meisiv the arichis ki yerek esav sheitarti ladam rishon atzati lechem eskel. Rashi actually elaborates on the other part that just like the greens that I allowed Adam Rishon to eat, I have allowed you to eat this as well. So if the whole point here is to clarify that meat became permissible later on, based on the whole understanding of Rashi that we had from the beginning, that Rashi is coming to tell us that the Eibishter compared the humans to the animals to prohibit the eating of meat, and Rashi is just telling us that in the time of Noach it became permissible to eat meat, then Rashi all he has to do is quote the pasuk that allows to tell us that you're allowed to eat meat later on. Why do we need the pasuk? Why is the pasuk not spelled out properly? And why does Rashi elaborate about the permissibility of eating greens? Ad kan is a list of questions. So, to go through them very quickly, number one, how can we learn from the animals not to eat meat if the animals themselves eat meat? Number two, why do we need a pasuk why do we need a comparison to animals if we have a pasuk that implies that we shouldn't eat meat? We're not allowed to eat meat in the time of Adam Rishon. What is bothering Rashi? Why does Rashi use the term v'loy hirsha? Why does Rashi say laham isberia, that only killing the animal is a problem? Why does Rashi repeat ach kol yerek esav yechlu yachad kulam? Why does Rashi bring the pasuk koremes asher uchai? Why doesn't he finish the pasuk lachem yeh la'achla? And why does he elaborate about the permissibility of eating greens? Those are our questions, and now in Sif Dalid, the Rebbe is going to answer all of these questions by first introducing to us the fact that what's bothering Rashi, first answering the question to understand what's bothering Rashi, and the Rebbe is going to tell us that Rashi is not telling us that the comparison of animals and humans is to prohibit meat. That we know from the pasuk, like the Rebbe asked in the second question. but there's going to be another point of what's the point of the comparison between the humans and the animals. And it's not about not eating meat. I mean, it's about not eating meat because she says so, but it's not in order to introduce the isser of not eating meat. And by understanding this, we'll understand what's bothering Rashi, and we'll understand a whole new perspective of the role of mankind in the creation of the world. The Bir B'Chozeh. Rashi, with his explanation, is coming to answer a number of questions in these psukim. Aleph, was war an Ort ot bichlal zu media sein in dem Sipur von Moshe Breishis, was Menschen und Chayis megen und können essen. What is the necessity to let us know in the story of creation what the people and the animals are allowed to eat? We're telling the story of creation. We're not discussing the specific needs of the creations. Now, the Breishis the Breishis that in the pasuk right before this, where the Eibishter said, be fruitful, be multiply, fill up the world, take control of the world, and rule over the fish and over the animals, etc., etc. So the Pruaravu is understood. It explains how the creation continues into this very day. Hashem created the world in a manner that they could reproduce. Is eingeschlossen in den Jonen von Moshe Breishis. It's also understood that the command that they should rule over the animal kingdom is included in the story of creation, because it describes the manner of the creation of the human being, of Adam. It's like how he is distinguished from all the other creations. As it said earlier, Hashem said, let us make man in our image, in our form, and they will rule on the fish of the sea, etc., and the other animals. And in continuation to that, the pasuk says that Hashem created Adam in his image. And he said to him, Urudu, be fruitful, be multiply, Urudu, and rule over the world. So the creation was done in a way that the Adam is supposed to conquer and control the world, be in charge of the world, use the world in the way it's meant to be used. So we understand why it says Pruaravu, and we understand why it says Urudu, because it's part of the description of creation. Aber wenn es kommt zu die Psukim, was sagen, was der Adam der Chai soll sollen essen, ist nicht move on. Was für der Scheich ist das zu Moshe Breishis. But in the Psukim that talk about what the people or the animals are going to eat, what's the connection to creation? How creation will continue, and what's the person's role as Urudu B'Gasayam in creation? That's part of Moshe Breishis. But the individual needs of the creations, that seems to be not so necessary to the overall story of Moshe Breishis. The other thing that's bothering Rashi is as follows. Even if we'll find a reason why we have to command the person what he should or shouldn't eat, bleibt nachher nicht move on. So the Wasser der Ewigste angesagt Adam wie Ishtei, was wird sein der Meichel von Chayesarz wie Shemayim. Even if we have to know what the Adam should eat, why do Adam and his wife need to be commanded as to what the animals should eat? In addition to the fact that the birds that were created on the fifth day not eat until Hashem told him what they should eat, which means that they were created a day ago. They were eating for a day without Adam's help. So obviously they don't need Adam's help. So in addition to that, why should Adam be commanded about the food or the sustenance of the animals? And you can't say, oh, it's part of, and you shall rule over the fish of the sea, etc. Since the Eibishter appointed them to be the rulers of the animal kingdom, so he's commanding them what they should eat. But do, because that's not what urudu means. Urudu doesn't mean that he has to take care of them, that he has to feed them. Urudu means he has to control them, rule over them, that to utilize them the way they're meant to be used in creation. But he doesn't have to take care of every single one of them and feed them. So you can't say that it's part of urudu. So these are two things that are bothering Rashi. That Rashi has a question on these psukim. How do we, in the middle of the story of Ma'aseh Breishis, how do we B'chlal speak about the sustenance of Adam and of the animals? And even if we have to tell Adam what he could or can't eat, why is Adam being commanded about the sustenance and the food of the animals? So in order to answer these two questions, is Rashi maitik from Pasuk Diverte lachem yiyah la'achla u'lechol chayas ha'aretz. Rashi quotes these, as we said earlier, the last three words of the first Pasuk, lachem yiyah la'achla, what you should eat, u'lechol chayas ha'aretz, and with a vav, what the animals are going to eat. Which Rashi's Dibra Maschil connects the two psukim with a connecting vav, and is mivared and Pirush HaKosov, and explains what the pasuk is telling us. Hashem compares the humans and the animals with regards to food. The kavanah from the Messiah from ersten pasuk, bechibur zum zweiten pasuk, the point, the intent of ending, the ending of the first pasuk and combining it to the second pasuk is nitzuzagen isurim. It's not to let us know prohibitions. Nitzulazn wissen was a mensch meg essen, was chayes darfen essen. Not to tell the person what he may eat or what animals should be eating. Their plus pasuk is blois uisen ein zach. The pasuk has one purpose. Madgi sein die Gleichkeiten zadashava von Menschen und Chayes, to emphasize, to highlight the comparison, the common denominator between humans and animals with regards to their food. Let's understand this. They're mocker from the Iser Basar Ladan V'Ishtei Lehirsha. The source of the prohibition against eating meat is taken from Ashmael from Ersten Pasuk, is understood like the Rebbe brought up in his question from the understanding of the very first Pasuk. Their fun was their Pasuk is matter blaze yerek esef, and the fact that the Pasuk permits only the greens is muchach b'derech hamela as basar is lit mutter. It's understood obviously that you can't eat meat. So before Rashi even opens up, we already know that you can't eat meat. So the Pasuk is not here to tell us that you can't eat meat. That we already know. The Torah is aber gleich meisif. But after the Torah tells us that we're supposed to eat greens, the Torah adds to that, as Esav is oich der Michael von Kolchai Yisrael v'chalei Hashemayim, that greens are also the food of the animals and the birds. In order to emphasize the comparison between the human, between Adam and the animals. Now we asked the question, 1 second, the comparison isn't fair, because animals eat meat. So the Rebbe explains, it's true that the animals eat not just greens, also meat. Their farglaich is mitzad echad. The comparison is one way. But Adam, with regards to what the human is eating, that his food, the greens, is the same as the animals. In other words, not that they both have identical foods. The animals eat meat. But in the fact that the human eats only greens, in that he's compared to the animals which also eat greens. We asked one of our questions was, why at the end of Rashi does he repeat, but grass, they could all eat together? What Rashi is doing is emphasizing this point. I'm not comparing the animals and the humans in the fact that they don't eat meat, because the animals do eat meat. I'm comparing the animals and the humans in the fact that they both eat grass. They're both eating grass. So Rashi's intent, because Rashi is bothered by these two questions, why all of a sudden in the middle of Ma'aseh Breishis, are we discussing the food of the animals? Comes Rashi and says that the pasuk over here is bringing up their food in order for me to understand that there is a comparison between animals and humans. They both eat the same food. They both eat greens. What would be the purpose at this point to highlight this comparison between animals and humans? Was ist negea siva? Was ist negea besiper brias Adam? Zu herausbringen die Ashvoah von sein Michael zu Michael Chayes Haaretz v'chulu. What is the purpose of highlighting this comparison between humans and animals in the story of creation? Is move on. It's understood. Because freer that the pasuk and the Nivroim. First, the pasuk told us the uniqueness, the advantage, the greatness that the human carries over the rest of creations. The human was created in the image of Hashem. Therefore, he rules and dominates the other creations. Uridu, as the pasuk says, you shall rule. Therefore, the pasuk has to clarify as that the Eibishter compared them, equated them when it came to their food. Despite the fact that he is higher, more lofty than other creations, is that Hanivra he still is also a creation. Which Hashem created in the following way, as b'Michael, was in them is totally the kiyum von achai. So there's Aishav l'chayis aretz, that when it comes to food, upon which his sustenance depends, he should be similar to the animals. For thus their mon dem adam, which this reminds the person, as er is in demselben suk from behemis v'chayis, that he's in the same category of the animals. Even though in certain areas the human being is at a higher level than the animals, but he has to be reminded that he is in the same category as them. He eats the same food as them. So that is what's happening in this pasuk. The Eibishter is comparing the humans to the animals in order to tell the human being that despite the fact that you have these incredible qualities, you have to know that you're created by Hashem. And in certain things, such as in food, which is the key to your sustenance, you are similar to an animal. Es bleibt aber nicht verstandig. So that doesn't make sense. And the pasuk sagt doch fort urudu v'geimer. The pasuk says urudu, you shall rule over them. So if he rules over them, he's greater than them. Why all of a sudden are we saying that they're not greater than them? Is Rashi mamshech, and therefore Rashi continues. Hashem did not allow Adam and his wife to kill a creature to eat its meat. When it comes to killing a creature and eating its meat, that permission was taken from him. That even though it says Uridu, Hashem did not allow him to use that level of rulership to kill animals and eat them. One of our questions was, why did Rashi use the words v'lahirsha and not basar aser? Now we understand. Now the adgasha does nitaf and achilas basar, because unlike in our question where we thought that Rashi was coming to teach us that eating meat was prohibited, that's not what this pasuk is telling us. We know already that you can't eat meat. That's not what this Rashi is telling us. We already know from the pasuk you can't eat meat. Rashi's emphasis here, nor of the pirush inalt u'funudu. Rashi here is coming to explain what does it mean to do. And this is nit rishus lam is beri v'lechal basar. That it does not include the permission to kill a creature to eat its meat. So that's why he says v'lahirsha, because it's part of an explanation of the word urudu. It's not a halacha of what is or is not prohibited. So now we understand so far that what's bothering what Rashi was, why is this discussion here? And therefore Rashi tells us, the discussion here is to tell us that although the Eibishter said, Nasa Adam Tzalmenu Kidmuseinu, and although the Eibishter said Uridu, and taught the Adam that he is greater than the rest of creation, he has to remember that he's still a Nivra, that he's still a creation of Hashem, and he has to remain humble in that way, as we'll see later in the Hira, and he has to recognize that in certain aspects he's just like an animal, a creation of Hashem. And even though Hashem told him Uridu, that does not include killing animals to eat them. And that explains why Rashi emphasizes the prohibition to kill the animal and eat its meat. About this, that you say from the Since the whole source of this prohibition, the whole purpose of this prohibition, is to negate the idea in the person's mind that he can go and kill the animals to eat them. Although it said urudu is moving on us, but so it's understood that what case are we talking about? We're talking about a case of eating meat, of killing the animal in order to eat its meat. Which would show that he is a ruler over the animals, that he could kill them to eat its meat. So therefore, Rashi has to negate this one. This is where you would think that the do means that he has power over the animals. And it says no, you don't have that level of power. But if the animal died by itself, then the reason of this Rashi that we're trying to negate the urudu, there's no reason to prohibit that meat because he didn't kill the animal. So the only case where you're able to negate the urudu, the fact that rulership of the humans over the animals does not include eating them, is when he would kill them and eat them. And the Rashi says, Laham is barrier. Now in Sif Zayim we go to the end of Rashi, where Rashi says that when it came to Bnei Noach, Hashem allowed them to eat meat, and then Rashi brings the pasuk, Kol remes asher uchai, goymar ki yerek esev, sheitarti la'adam rishon, nesati lechem eskoil. And we ask the question, why does Rashi have to bring a pasuk, the pasuk, and not just tell us that it was permissible? And if he's going to bring the pasuk, why does he omit the words lachem yiyeh la'achla? And why does Rashi elaborate ki yerek esev sheitarti la'adam rishon sati lachem eskil? But now that we understand that we're on a different path, the discussion here was not, are you allowed to eat meat? Or that you weren't allowed to eat meat, and then later you were allowed to eat meat. The discussion over here was to remind the Adam that in certain aspects he's on the same level, in the same category as Behemoths v'chayis, and therefore he doesn't have the right to kill them in order to eat them. Now we'll understand what's happening in the end of Rashi. If Rashi tells us that when it came to the children of Noach, it became permissible to eat meat, we have a question. Now the whole purpose, the whole prohibition to not kill the animal, to eat its meat, was in order to make sure that the person doesn't forget that he himself is also a creation. So the generations that came after Noach, do they not need this assurance, this reminder? Why all of a sudden are they allowed to eat meat? That's why Rashi elaborates and brings the actual pasuk where the heter is stated. And along with that, Rashi includes the end of the pasuk, where you see the comparison to the greens. Beis is Moshe from Mefarish and Lashon HaKasav Kiyerek Esav Sheitarti L'Adam Rishon. Rashi adds the words which I made permissible to Adam Rishon. With them dieted on Rashi, with this Rashi is pointing out Adas Asmat Matri given Basar L'Bnei Noach. The fact that the meat became permissible to the children of Noach is nitvel bazei is nit negia di bagranitzung von Urudu b'negia l'maychol, is not because they don't have these limitations to their urudu, that they're not allowed to kill the animals in order to eat. Meaning to say that they have to know that urudu only goes to a certain point. Now this is a heter. There is a heter, there's a special permission. Mitzadam zelben tam, gleich zu dem tam, was der Eibishter hat matig gemacht yerek esev. Just like Hashem allowed people to eat greens. Why? I allowed them to eat the greens so they should be able to live and be healthy. So too, at that point, the Eibishter also allowed them to eat meat because they needed it for health reasons. But it doesn't change the fact that the urudu, that the fact that a person rules the animals, it doesn't allow him to eat differently than by killing the animal for its meat. In other words, the taich of urudu remains the same. That be'etzem he shouldn't have been allowed to kill the animal, to eat the meat, because urudu doesn't go that far. But for a side reason, because it was needed for their health, therefore the Eibishter allowed it. So that's why Rashi has to bring the whole pasuk. The Chelek is part of the pasuk because that gives us the reason why Hashem allowed them to eat meat, not because all of a sudden there was a change in the urudu, but because there was a change in the fact that they needed it for their health. When the father lost Rashi used the word lecham yelachla, which explains why Rashi omits the words lecham yelachla, but does not negate the heter from achilas basar, because this Rashi is not telling us that meat became permissible. Again, in the original question, where the beginning of Rashi was telling us that meat was prohibited, so that Rashi has to tell us at the end that meat was not prohibited. In the new understanding of Rashi, that the beginning of the pasuk is not telling us that meat is not allowed. It's telling us that the person is compared to the animals, and he shouldn't be too haughty about it. So he has to be reminded. So Rashi has to tell us that even when he did allow it, it wasn't because the urudu changed. It was only because there was a special heter that the Eibishter gave. So therefore, he doesn't include the words lacham yeh la'achla, because he's not coming to give us the heter to eat meat. Now, they're tama heter. Rashi is telling us why it became mutter. It's like the greens that I allowed other nation to eat. And therefore, Rashi has no need to bring the words lacham yeh la'achla. He only brings the words Kiyerek Esav Shitati L'Adam Rishon. And with this, all of the questions that we asked in Rashi are answered. Kafter v'ferach. Chesti Radev v'Nevenis Hashem, the lesson. Ha'amur az Radam darf zusammen mit nur du wissen was markisch sein. Vielen as is nit mehr wie nivra. That which we discussed. That the person at the same time, while he has a command of urudu, that he has to be in control of the animals. He also has to know and realize that he himself is also just a creation. He's not just to make sure that a person shouldn't come to a point of gaiva and other negative character traits that come with that. Which may result from not properly understanding what urudu means. But there's something much more than that. In order to properly have the urudu, in order to properly control or rule over the animal kingdom, you have to know who you are, where you come from. You have to know that you yourself are also just a nivra. When a person thinks that urudu means that he is the one in control, with his strength, then he can't rule anymore. Because then he is the same thing as they are. As soon as he forgets where his control comes from, then he becomes like them, like the animals, and he can't control them anymore. It's only when he remembers the truth, as that he is equal to all creations, and his ability to rule over them. When he thinks he's better than them, then he can't rule them. When he thinks he's like them, then he could rule them, because then he realizes where his power comes from. So he's not zayin l'diya. It's not his rulership. The Eibishter gave him the ability to do so. And therefore, is the emissary deal from the Eibishter. Where does the true rulership come from? From the Eibishter, who created the person. As we find this in Rashi, a few psukim earlier, where it says, Nasa Adam, let us make man in our image and our form, and he will rule over the fish of the sea, etc. So Rashi says like this, yes, but what's the word v'yirdu? What does it mean? So yes, but lashon yiridui, the lashon yirida. This word could mean dominion, rulership, and it could mean to descend. Zacha reida. If he is meritorious, then he is in control. He dominates. Le zacha nasa yared lifneim. But if he's not meritorious, then he becomes lower than them. And the animal could rule over him. But the pirush apnimi bazayis, which literally means that in order that sometimes a person deserves it and he gets to be in control. Sometimes a person doesn't deserve it, and the animals do what they want. But there's a deeper pshush. Zacha falash zichoch. Zacha doesn't just mean meritorious; it means refined. When a person is refined, uzgi edelt. Shasa mensch edelt zichuis er is uzkitof and gaivon. Yes, is when a person refines himself, removes the gaiva, the haughtiness from himself. There are gate bekeich of a neighborstin, and he goes in the way of with Hashem's strength. Is reida b'hem? Then he could be in control of them. Shasa berlei zacha and hat sich nit genug mezacha given. But if he did not refine himself sufficiently, he feels himself as a important existence in this picture. The fact that he rules over them is because of his strength. Demot is nasa yarud b'fneim, then he becomes lower than them. Nitner says b'shavetz al nivraim. Not only is he equal to the other creations, no nachmar, but more than that, he's actually lower than them. This is the deeper explanation why the Eibishter dropped in this whole comparison to the animals right after Urudu. So that we should understand what does mean Urudu. Urudu, to rule over them, means that it has to be in a manner of Zacha. You have to recognize that you're one of them, that really you're a Nivra of Hashem, and the whole power of Urudu is only when you recognize that it's coming from Hashem. And there's actually a very practical lesson in today's day and age. When you say, we're talking about over here that Abisar compared Adam to the animals. And until now we were talking about humans versus animals. But Adam also means Yidden. So you say Adam here, we mean Yidden. When the Abisar sagt zu Yidden nur du. And the Abisar tells Yidden nur du, you should rule the world. It says that strangers will rise up to pasture your sheep. As Yidden are going to control the people to do work for them. Until so much so that even in time of Galus, when the other nations are in positions of rulership, it says that the kings will be your workmen, and the mistresses will be your wet nurses. Meaning to say that the Yidden ultimately are the ones that are in control of the world, and the nations of the world serve the Yidden. Is in them dihera. So the idea of Urudu on a deeper level is that Yidden are in control of the world. But here there's a lesson. If a person relies on his own strength, even if he recognizes it that he came from the Eibishter, but he says, I have great qualities, they're my qualities, then he is not meritorious, he didn't refine himself, and the animal is in control. Not only do the nations not treat him respectfully, as one would do to someone who is their ruler, the opposite. And even in his own feeling, he falls down in front of them. And generally for Goyishkeit, for the whole non-Jewish attitude. When a person thinks that he's in control because of something that he accomplished, what ultimately happens is the nations don't respect him, and ultimately he doesn't respect himself. When he is meritorious, he refines himself. He knows that the Eibishter is the one who gives him the strength to be successful. He doesn't go with his own wisdom and understanding. Rather, he goes with the Eibishter's wisdom, which is Teira and Shulchan Aruch. He conducts himself according to the instructions of the Eibishter. He goes with the strength of his sender. Then he's in control. And even in the time of Galus, we see how the nations are serving the Yidden. Until we reach a point where the strangers will come to pasture our sheep, when Mashiach comes. So the takeaway, of course, is that the role of the human is to be in control of the world, and not that the world should be in control of them. And the role of the Yid is to be in control of the world and in control of Goyishkeit, and not the opposite. When a Yid comes with the proper attitude, that he comes with the Kayach of the Eibishter, and he follows the instructions of Torah and Shulchan Aruch, then he has the strength to be in control of the world, and ultimately we'll see that in a revealed way with the coming of Mashiach, B'mheira v'yameinu.